Hi, everybody who's joining.
Hello, everybody. Looks like people are joining up.
Nice to see everybody getting on the phone, on the screen. Welcome.
We're a little over halfway there. Just going to give it another minute or two before we get started.
You know what, just to make sure that everybody knows how to use Zoom and this webinar application, how about if you open up your chat box in the toolbar? It should have 3 dots over it. Sometimes it's hidden behind the More button, but anyways, find your chat box. And if you could, just let me know what organization you're calling in from, what your role is before we get started. All right, we got Anne on the line. Anne, what's your organization? All right. Lynn, University of Scranton. I see Jaka. Oops, now everybody's typing in. It's scrolling up faster than I can read. Wayne County Community Foundation. And we've got Family Service Association. Great. Lindsay, YMCA, welcome. Eloise, University of Scranton. Excellent. Maggie, you probably know these organizations a lot better than I do. Santi at the Diocese of Scranton.
Yeah.
NEPA Philharmonic. Christine, hello. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, so I welcome everybody. As Amy mentioned, we're feel free to put into the chat box which organization you're from and your name, just to make sure you can hear us all okay. I'm going to go through just a few of the housekeeping items. First, I want to thank you all for joining us. What has become kind of a weekly Friday webinar series that we've been trying to offer to help you all during this very difficult time. We are grateful very much to have Amy Eisenstein on the call today. She has actually been to Scranton with us. She was here last year, just around this time actually. And we are hoping, we had scheduled for her to be coming in what would be next week, but of course, you know, with everything going on, we have postponed that. We do still hope to bring her back here to Scranton and to do a 2-part series, do a evening session for anybody who's kind of new to the development. We did in the evening so that hopefully some board members or those who volunteer with organizations can attend. And then when we'll have a full day session for anybody who's a current development director or does development as part of their full-time job that might already have some a good baseline of understanding of donor development, so that we can kind of provide like an advanced, you know, 201, maybe 301 higher level training on that. But we asked Amy to help us out today to kind of talk about how we can continue to engage donors and raise funds during this crisis. You know, Amy and I said that it's important to not put your foot on the brake right now. And in some ways you might have to put your foot on the gas to kind of continue things moving. Before I officially turn it over to her, just a couple things as far as the housekeeping. As Amy mentioned, if you hover over the bottom of the screen, there are a couple options you'll see there. There's the Q&A. I'm going to ask that you all use that for any specific content related questions. We'll try to, Amy will either answer them during, or we'll try actually for the most part to answer them at the end. We'll do some Q&A then. The chat sheet will also be using throughout for any kind of quick answers people might want to provide. You can also use that for any technical issues that you might be facing. Feel free to use the chat and I'll be responding. And lastly, there should also be a raise your hand feature. I'm going to ask everybody to hold off on using the raise the hand feature, at least during the main part of the session. As much as possible, please use the Q&A option. And then if you feel strongly about wanting to raise your hand and speak at the Q&A part, please feel free to do that, and we'll turn your mic off at that point, or excuse me, turn your mic on at that point. We will unmute you so that you have the chance to talk. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be with you guys, if not in person like I was supposed to be next week, here the next best thing via Zoom. And so welcome everybody. It is a challenging time. I imagine that many of you are working from home, probably for the first time, and maybe you have kids at home or sick family members. If you don't yet know somebody who has come down with COVID-19, you will soon. I'm much closer to New York City than you are. I'm in New Jersey, and I already know many people that have become ill. So it is a really scary, anxious time. So I feel like, you know, some of the things we're going to talk about are how to engage your donors remotely, over video chat, over the web, and also why it's so important for you to continue to raise money and how to raise emergency funding during this time. But I really also think it's super important for us to do a little bit of check-in, of quasi-therapy and connection, so that we're all here as a community to support one another during this really intense time. So I just want to do a little informal poll. And again, we're going to use the chat box for this. So I want to know how you're feeling. It doesn't have to be exactly one of these. I'm just throwing some things out here, but I'd love to hear from you how you're doing. You know, maybe not bad under the circumstances, settled into working from home, anxious but managing, super anxious. And if you can type into all panelists and attendees, then everybody can see your answer. If you're only clicking the button that says all panelists, then just two of us can see it. So, so if you're willing to sort of share what's going on, so use that blue drop-down box to respond to attendees too. So anxious but managing. We've got a lot of anxious but managing. Someone's weepy and sad and doing well under the circumstances, stressed. Yeah, so I feel like, you know, everybody's got something going on now. The reason that I want to start out sort of acknowledging this is because your donors are feeling a wide range of emotions too. This is not normal. You know, I refuse to say this is the new normal. I'm not willing to concede that this is normal in any way, shape, or form. And so when you are communicating with your donors, I want you to really acknowledge that you might not be at the top of your game, and that your board members, you know, you may catch them. I think from day to day, honestly, things change so rapidly with what's happening. And honestly, whether or not I can go outside, if it's raining or not, significantly influences how I'm feeling. Yeah, Patricia says, worried about what's coming next. I mean, if we knew that this was going to end in 2 weeks, I think we'd all be okay. It's the not knowing and sort of the continuation of it that's so burdensome. So I want to make sure that you're, you know, of course, when you're picking up the phone, talking to donors, that you're really sensitive and aware that, you know, you might be catching them at a really bad time or a really bad day. You know, they may have just found out that somebody's sick or that a family member's in the hospital. So I think that that's important sort of to acknowledge. So now I want just another 30 seconds, type in the chat box, what are you doing for self-care? What are you doing to make yourself feel better? You know, I've always wanted to meditate, but I've never started it. And now I'm really trying to do that. So yeah, we've got hiking and cooking, exercising, just long walks. I love it. I mean, I think you know, one of the issues that keeps coming up about working from home for the first time is that when there's really no separation between work and home, you can slip into a bad habit of working 24/7. And probably the work feels endless because you're so anxious about raising money and what's going to happen. And so I really want you to think about setting sort of start and stop times for your workday, you know, whether it's really strict 9 to 5, or I'm a morning person. I'm happy to work at 6 a.m., but by 2 p.m., I'm sort of, you're catching me at the end of my awake period. I'm going to be fried by the end of this call. So I know that, you know, normally from 2 to 5 or 6, I'm going to take a big hunky break. Maybe I'll you know, respond to some emails after 6, but I think it's a problem when your desk is in the middle of your living room, and you can feel called to working all the time. So just some things to think about if you're newly working from home. Oh, okay. So I did ask, what are you doing for self-care? And we've got all sorts of good suggestions. I think it's important to really think about it because with the anxiety levels, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so now we're going to get into fundraising. But first, I thought I would love it if you guys have had a success story or received a generous donation or a surprise donation or had a great conversation with a donor. Can you just share that quickly as well? Because I think what I've been hearing is that a lot of executive directors or board members think you shouldn't be fundraising right now, or we shouldn't be asking for money. But I would like to know who has had a success in the last 2 or 3 weeks, a fundraising success. I really hope you have. Okay. Carmela, thank you for starting us. You received surprise funding without asking. Awesome. You know, people really are stepping up and being generous in huge ways. Anybody else? Oh my goodness. Scranton, we're not as many success stories yet as I had hoped. Nobody else has have a success story, or you're not feeling brave enough to share right now. Okay, good. Thank you. Sent an email to a few donors, and received a nice donation. Okay, Kathy, and we received the same, also donations from people who have not donated in many years or new donors. So that's awesome. Donors sending in early donations ahead of our mailing. Great conversation with donors who decided to make a significant gift that helps a family in crisis. Okay, so thank you for trickling those in. Maybe you need, I needed to give you a minute to think about them, but I had a call with a few hundred donors, fundraisers yesterday, and the stories poured in. They just poured in of successes that people have had, surprise donations or donors stepping up in big ways. Good. Patricia, you received sponsorship payments, though your event is postponed. You know, I think it's okay if you cancel your events, and not to make the assumption that donors automatically get a refund, but it's an opportunity to reach out to every single donor and ask if they would contribute their ticket or their sponsorship. Only a very small number are going to ask for a refund. So, all right, good. So, but I actually have heard countless stories of organizations being able to raise exceptional dollars in the past 2 weeks because they're communicating with their donors, they're telling their stories, and that is sort of the overall theme and message that I really want to share today as we go through some concrete examples of how you can pivot your fundraising and do some emergency fundraising, that you need to communicate with donors. You want to keep fundraising. As Maggie said, put your foot on the express pedal, not on the brake of fundraising. We'll talk about why it is okay to ask right now. Actually, it's critical to ask right now, and donors are giving and being generous. Linda says a local foundation changed a restricted to an unrestricted fund. I've been hearing that as well. Yeah, so, and Rosemary says, you know, struggling because management are afraid to fundraise during this time. It's a huge mistake. You're missing out on an opportunity. Donors are stepping up and being generous when they can. Some of our donors can't, and that's okay. And we love them, you know, anyways. But lots of donors are feeling trapped at home. They are trapped at home. They're feeling helpless and they want to have purpose and meaning in their lives. And by giving them an opportunity to make a difference in the world, you're giving them that sense of purpose. Okay, so let's get into it a little bit, but I have to tell you that I am going to leave a lot of time for questions because I really want us to, I want this to be an opportunity for you to get your specific questions answered. So whenever you're ready, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. All right, so I think the message is that you're going to keep fundraising through however long this crisis lasts. Now, you may not be doing the same types of things. Your events may be canceled. You may not be able to sit down face to face with a donor, but you are going to be able to stay in touch with your donors. It's critical, actually, that you stay in touch with your donors. And that means calling them, writing them, emailing them, video chat. So I hope that you have the ability to tap into your donor database from wherever you're working now, presumably most of you at home. And hopefully you are now set up so that you can remotely log on and generate lists of donors. And the key thing is that you want to be in touch with and ask for money from donors in a specific order. So you're going to start with your biggest and best donors and prospective donors, and that can be measured based on how much they've given, right? You're going to run lists of your largest donors. You're going to run lists of your loyal donors. So anybody who's given for several years in a row or multiple gifts per year, you want to run those lists, and by recency. So anybody who's given, you know, this year or in the past few months. So here's the bottom line, right? You can ask for money. You should be asking for money. So the question is a little bit how. And there's a variety of ways that you're going to be asking for money and keeping in touch with your donors. You're going to be picking up the phone and calling them. You're going to be using video chat, email, and sometimes mail. If it's appropriate or if you can, you may still be able to mail your donors. But let's start with picking up the phone. The question is, you know, what are you going to say? Let's start with what are you going to say, right? So we want to first and foremost call our donors, the donors that I talked about, your biggest donors, your most loyal donors, people who have given to you recently. You want to pick up the phone and call them in the coming days and weeks. And first and foremost, you want to check in on them, right? How are they doing? How are they feeling? Do they know anybody that's sick? Do they have anybody in the hospital? Do they have anybody that's sick in their house? So those are some of the first questions you're going to ask. So personal wellness questions, we'll call them. And then next, we want to think about their financial situation, right? Have they been able to transition to work from home? What's going on with their family employment, right? Are they working from home? Have they lost their job? So those are some of the questions that you're going to ask. They're going to be key indicators to know whether or not it's okay to transition into a fundraising conversation. You can ask them how they're keeping themselves busy, what's going on, how has their day-to-day life changed, right? And so if they seem stable, right? Nobody in their household is sick, They seem to be okay for now. They're working from home. Things have transitioned nicely. Then you can ask them. We always talk about asking permission to ask. And so you can ask them, are you interested in hearing what's going on at our organization, or how how we're managing, right? Is that a conversation that you'd be willing and interested in having now? And quite frankly, what our needs are and how you might be able to help. So that's how you're going to transition to the fundraising conversation. All right, let me look at some of these comments here. Lindsay says, what if most of your facility has closed, providing online services and anticipating need for scholarships? Yes, as soon as we reopen the doors. Right. Okay, so in a minute, we're going to talk about asking for emergency money and pivot campaigns. So let me, let's go to the next slide. Maybe I'll come back to this for a second. So let's talk about that. So you're going to pivot it's time to pivot your fundraising for most of you to emergency fundraising. I didn't ask how many of you were in capital campaigns, but some of you who are in capital campaigns may temporarily decide to pause your campaign. I don't think that's a conversation that I would share with my donors. You may share the fact that you're going to extend the timeline. That's what you may need to think about in terms of a capital campaign fundraising. But either way, you probably want to think about, if you haven't already, we're 3 weeks in, so maybe many of you have created your emergency fundraising campaigns, but I think regardless of what type of organization you are, whether you provide emergency services like healthcare, or if you're a food bank, I mean, there's some very obvious agencies that are helping in this crisis right now. But even if you're other types of agencies, you should be raising emergency funding, because the likelihood is that the need is significantly greater. And let me give you a few examples. So Lindsay's talking about scholarships. So I don't know what kind of agency you're running, but let's say it's a school, since it's scholarships. It could be a lot of different things, but that is a need that's going to arise out of this crisis, that her students or members or whatever users, her clients, in greater numbers than ever, are going to need scholarship. And so that is something that you should be pivoting your fundraising and doing appeals, whether they're online email appeals, maybe a mail appeal. I say maybe because things are changing so fast these days, and I don't honestly know if mail houses are open. So I think there are probably pros and cons to thinking about getting an appeal in the mail today. I mean, if you can do it, then do it, especially if that's how your donors normally respond to you. If you can do email appeals, obviously that's critical as well. And you want to do part of this emergency fundraising, a huge part, in fact, on the phone with your donors. And you can talk, oh, okay, so Lindsay, thank you. YMCA childcare, swim lessons, memberships. Yes. So you are going to be doing lots and lots of fundraising for scholarship. And because there's going to be a great need for people to continue that. Now, one of the fundraising expressions that I love most about the YMCA that I learned at a NATO conference, that's the National YMCA Development Directors Conference. I've spoken there for the past several years. Actually, I think it was supposed to be this week. I was supposed to be with them in, I guess, DC, speaking at their conference. One of the things that I learned years ago at a NATO conference that I love is that they say when fundraising, that the YMCA membership is what you do for yourself, and a donation is what you do for somebody else. So I actually think that this is a wonderful time to do a lot of that type of fundraising, to call your membership and say, listen, if you're okay and you're able to keep your Y membership right now, I'm asking you to think about donating a membership for somebody else in the community, because we know that lots of our members are going to need support and scholarship and membership fees. And so we're calling all of our loyal members and donors and asking them, assuming that they're going to be able to keep their membership, if you would consider a monthly donation that would equal a membership for somebody else. You know, it doesn't, so that's sort of the idea. I was actually talking to somebody who's running a summer camp and is really nervous, obviously, that summer camp is going to be potentially canceled this summer, which would be devastating on so many levels. But they're going to do a pivot fundraising campaign right now, because several families have already called to say we can't afford to send our kids to camp this summer anymore, even if it goes. So they're going to do a scholarship campaign and call families and say, sponsor a friend. Make sure that the kid in your bunk or your group is going to be able to come to camp. And that's not quote unquote emergency services. It's not healthcare. It's not food. It's not emergency need right now, but it is critical. It's mission critical. And those are the types of fundraising campaigns that you want to do. All right, so let me go back to my last slide for a second. And so if anybody wants to ask another question, feel free to go ahead and type it into the chat box. Let me see if I think I'm on the wrong. Okay, sorry, just playing with the chat boxes for a second. All right, so I think you want to think about a multi-pronged approach to fundraising. So first and foremost, you want to run your lists of those donors you're going to call and check in with them, find out how they're doing, as I mentioned, and then see if you can transition to see if they would make a generous donation for whatever your emergency fund. So one of them, of course, is tuition relief. So if you are a school, you might be fundraising, that's your emergency relief fund, your COVID, I mean, all of you should be creating COVID emergency relief funds. Let's say you're, though, a performing arts center or a museum, and there's sort of a less obvious emergency crisis need. You know, I think a lot of times when I hear we shouldn't be fundraising now from executive directors or board members, it might be at like a performing arts center where they say, well, we don't have an emergency need for this response. Well, I don't think that's true. I think that actually being at home has shown people that there is such a strong need for culture, for arts, for connection, for creativity. And so people are sitting at home going crazy, and the online has exploded with opportunities to stay in touch and be creative and tap into that part of ourselves. You know, it's what keeps us human. So, and also, I think keeping the artists that you have, the performers, the musicians, the art teachers on staff and being paid is a critical need to continuing successfully when you start up again. If they are unemployed or, unpaid for a long extended period of time, they may go find jobs elsewhere, or they may do something else, and you want to make sure that you're keeping and retaining the best staff and talent. And that is what your emergency fundraising campaign is for. So I think it's about figuring out what your emergency pivot campaign looks like, and thinking about creating I would create an 8 to 12 week emergency fundraising campaign. And over at the Capital Campaign Toolkit, which is sort of the other hat I wear, we are encouraging organizations that are in traditional capital campaigns to create official pivot campaigns, 8 to 12 week campaigns that they are modeling after traditional campaign fundraising. So we're encouraging them to create a gift range chart, which is just set a goal, So whether it's $100,000 or $1 million, whatever your emergency pivot goal is, and then figuring out how many gifts at what levels you would need to raise that type of money. So if you want to raise $100,000 for your emergency fund, you probably need, in the traditional campaign model, you need one gift of $20,000. So 20% of your goal would be the top gift, and then 2 or 3 gifts at the $10,000 level, and then a few gifts at the $5,000 level, maybe 10 of those, and then 20 gifts at the $1,000 level and on down. So then identifying who are the donors that you could ask for those types of gifts. And so really modeling it after a capital campaign model. And you can do this whether you're in a campaign or not, figuring out how much do you need to raise to sustain yourself and provide scholarship and salary, which we're not talking about the CARES Act yet, but we certainly can. So how are you going to model your campaign? And then of course, at the end of that campaign, after you go to your top 20 or 30 donors to support this emergency fund, then how will you go out to your donor base? On the phone, via video chat, email, and mail. You might do a crowdfunding campaign if you have the technology and the crowd to sort of support that type of thing. I wouldn't try it for the first time, maybe, if you've never done anything like that before. Use the modes of fundraising that you have used successfully in the past. Okay, so let me see here. Okay. All right, so, okay, so I think, that's almost all. I'm ready to go to questions in just a few minutes. I want to make sure that the last thing I want to say is that don't make assumptions about what your donors will and won't and can and can't do. I think too many times people will say, well, it's not a good time to ask for money. Well, for who is it not a good time to ask for money? Not for me. For me, it's a great time to ask for money. I want to give back. I want to do something meaningful. I need meaning in my life. I have some money, even though the stock market's down. How many of your donors do you think give annual fund gifts out of stocks, out of assets versus their cash flow? So if they haven't lost their job, I understand many people have lost their jobs, but many people haven't. So how many people do you think make annual fund gifts out of stock? Not that many. Most of them are making their gifts out of cash flow. So you should be asking for monthly gifts for anybody that gives to you on an annual basis. A $50 donation, you should be asking them to consider a $10 a month gift, if you have the infrastructure set up for monthly giving, which hopefully you do by now. If you don't, that's a priority. So then if you get any donors who normally give you $50 a year to give you $10 a month, you've more than doubled their gift. Same thing for donors who give you $100 a year. You should be asking them for $20 a month, and you've more than doubled their gift. And I'll tell you why this is really important. The donor retention rate in this country, well, I should ask, who knows? You don't have to tell me what it is, but who knows their donor retention rate? Type it in the chat box. Just say yes or no. We know it or we don't know it. I know how many donors we keep year after year after year. Yes or no. Yes, I know it. No, I don't know it. I don't, if you want to tell me what it is, great. If you don't want to tell me, I'm not going to shame you publicly. Okay, Maria, you're the first one to say we know it. Awesome. You get a gold star today. Anybody else know what it is? Most people probably don't know it. And honestly, that's not unusual. Most people don't know what it is, but I have to tell you that in the fundraising world, I think there are more of you on the line than that. So hopefully, I guess you don't want to say whether you know it or not, but thank you for those of you who answered. The reason that this is so important is because if you don't know what your donor retention rate is, you don't know how many donors you're keeping and losing from year to year. You have no way of first of all, improving it, right? So anybody want to guess what the national average donor retention rate is? Just guess. What percent of donors do you think give year after year after year? Okay, Kathy, you probably know. Otherwise, it was a really good guess. It's around 45%. 20%, Maureen, that's closer to first-time donor retention. So that means that 80%, 70 to 80% of first-time donors aren't going to give you a second gift. But more than 50% of your donors aren't going to come back at all. That is really, really bad. But when you get a donor to give you a monthly gift, the donor retention rate goes up to almost 90% because they give month after month after month. And does anybody know the only time that monthly donors really stop giving their monthly donation? It's when their credit card expires, right? So this is a wonderful way to build your base. And when you're talking about emergency fundraising, the reason that I went off on this really important tangent is that when you get a monthly donor, you can tell them that they're supporting you all year round. So not only are they going to get you through the crisis, but they're going to make sure that your funding is stable throughout the year. That's why a $10 a month gift is actually better than a $100 a year gift. First of all, it's $120, but they're much more likely to continue that $10 a month than they are to give you that $100 next year. Does that make sense? So I think, the two really important key messages that I want to leave you with are don't make assumptions. I heard from lots of executive directors and development directors, it's not a good time to ask our donors for money, or donors don't want to be bothered now or give now. And that is, you're making assumptions, you're projecting onto the donors. And so please, please don't do that. Call them up. I've heard nothing but good feedback about when development directors get in touch with donors. They're happy for the connection. We're all sort of stuck and trapped at home. I know some of us are working hard, but for those of you for those of our donors who are living alone or senior citizens, they're really bored. They're really alone and isolated. And so getting a call, even from somebody who works at a charity that they're a fan of, is a wonderful reprieve from doing a puzzle or watching TV or whatever it is. So many people are picking up the phone and looking for human connection. So that's what you should be doing. Okay. So, all right, so that is what I had prepared. I mean, listen, I can talk forever. I actually pulled out some questions that I got on a donor call yesterday. So until you guys ask your questions, I think I'm gonna just share what some of those are because I think they're really important. So, Mark, on a call that I was on with a few hundred donors, asked yesterday, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about planning and fundraising for fall galas. Typically this would not, or this would be the time that we would start soliciting major gifts and sponsorships, which obviously we can't do now. He wrote that, which obviously we can't do that. And already know how I feel about that. It's not obvious that you can't do that. You should be soliciting your major gifts and your sponsorships. Listen, some organizations aren't going to be able to do that, and others are, but you should not be making those assumptions for them. Of course, you have to start fundraising as if your fall gala is coming. So then he goes on to say, we're questioning whether or not it's wise to devote the time needed to put on a major event. So that's another question altogether. You know that, well, you may not know. I am skeptical of events. I do think you need to do them once a year for for cultivation, for a few different reasons, but are they the best vehicles for fundraising? Probably not. Do they take up tons of time and energy and effort? I encourage you that if you have events that you're canceling now for the next month, if you've done a lot of the fundraising, don't reschedule them. Just either put them online, make them virtual, or cancel them all together, but don't give the money back and don't have to go through all the headache and hassle of rescheduling them and planning them again. In terms of this fall gala that Mark's talking about, so I think you should plan as if you're going to have it and then have a plan B to take it virtual, but go out and start fundraising. You know, tell your regular sponsors and donors, look, we're highly dependent on the income from this event. We're hoping that it takes place, and we're going to do everything in our power to make it happen, and we hope you're still with us. So absolutely. Okay, so let's see here.
There is a question from Maureen in the chat box, and we'll say I did put it in the chat, but we welcome anybody to please put any questions that you have into the Q&A. So hover over the bottom the Q&A box, and we'll start answering those questions.
Okay, great. So Maureen, so you say you send a newsletter out the first of the month, which was 2 days ago. So maybe you did that. It seems that it is okay to add a donate button for COVID-19 for temporary donations, right? Absolutely. I don't know why you wouldn't. I think you should always have a donate now button in your newsletter every month, regardless of whether it's COVID or not. So for sure, you should definitely have that. All right, so let me read another question that I got the other day.
There is one in there.
Oh, I see it. I see it now. I was on the wrong tab. Carmela, how can we convert a tribute dinner to Plan B virtual event? Listen, you're going to have to be creative. This time calls for creativity. And, 2 weeks ago, I would have had tons and tons of people tell me that their donors couldn't do Zoom or didn't know how to use video chat. Everybody and their brother, including my parents who are in the mid-70s, have now been on multiple Zoom calls. My kids who are in middle school and high school, they're using Zoom. And so anybody who thinks that they couldn't use Zoom or didn't know how to do it, all of their teachers who are really clunky with technology have learned, in a matter of days to use Zoom. So you're going to have to sit down with your committee over Zoom and your honorees and be really creative and say, all right, how are we going to be in touch with people? Maybe we change it to small gatherings, table by table. We can have a Zoom table and groups of 10 gathering and present the award. Or you can do it like a webinar and invite people to come and see their friend or colleague honored. Is it going to be perfect or the same as it is in person? No, but I wonder, I would love to know if other people have ideas. You can put them in the chat box. How can we be creative and innovative and make things feel heartfelt and special? I'm seeing lots of people have dinners over Zoom and have happy hour Zoom and all sorts of things. Is it the same as we've been used to? No, but it's, all sorts of auctions have been put online. And if you have to have a virtual event, do a group think. Ask all of your committee members, your board members, your volunteers, your honorees, how do they see this working virtually? What ideas do they have? And do a brainstorm. There's no bad ideas. And I think that's going to be the reality for right now, that we need to think about how to do things differently and creatively and innovatively. You can use video, have a whole video testament section where there's all sorts of programs where you can send out an email and people can take a 10-second video congratulating the honoree, and you can compile it, not you, but these companies do it. I don't think it's expensive, into sort of a montage, into a 6 or 8 minute montage with 100 people saying, hey, congratulations, we love you, this is why you're so great, or whatever it is. I think there's lots of innovative, creative things that you could do. Okay. Maureen, for the event honoring someone, have people send you positive comments about the person? Oh, wow, I didn't even see that. And gather it all together and send a party box to the honoree with decorations and a booklet and all the nice compliments. I love it. Thank you, Maureen, for sharing that. That's awesome. Okay, so let me read another question that I had. So, how do we adequately approach donors, especially individuals, about funding when we don't know what their situation is? So, you know, you have to ask, right? You can't know. And I think the big mistake that lots of fundraisers make is that they tend to avoid those uncomfortable situations by not calling and not reaching out. And that is, in my opinion, a huge mistake. Let me just tell you a lesson learned. Anybody here fundraising 10 years ago during the 2008 recession? Let me see in the chat box. Were you guys fundraising 10 years ago? Or do we have lots of new fundraisers? So I'm curious to hear, those of you that were fundraising 10 years ago, the people, okay, good. Craig, you ran a capital campaign. Did you raise as much money as you thought? And did you stay the course? I guess that's the question. You know, for those of you whose organization sort of pulled back and hit the brakes, and who, okay, Craig, you met your campaign goal, right? In the middle of a recession, when we thought the whole world, the financial world was caving in and we thought we'd never recover, you know, things did. And I'll tell you that the organizations that stuck to their plan, communicated with their donors, stayed the course, kept at it, they actually did better than they thought. They raised more money. And you know, the organizations that suffered the most, the ones that cut their fundraising budgets, fired their development staff, canceled all of their programs, and stopped their fundraising and freaked out, those organizations, it took years to recover, if they recovered at all. And so, you know, Maria says they did pretty well. You know, I think those of you that were around and did fundraising and were at organizations that were insightful enough to either actually invest in fundraising by sending your team to, you know, to trainings or to webinars, or made investments by sending more mailings or trying new things or being creative and investing in technology. Those organizations actually raised more than their goals and that they thought they would than those that didn't. So Tim says we held our annual fundraising dinner in New York on schedule in October of 2008. For those of you that don't remember, Lehman Brothers had just like gone belly up, and we raised our goal, right? You know, people thought it was impossible with the whole financial market crashing that people would fundraise. Now I know that this is a different situation with the world health crisis. And, you know, nobody knows how long it will last. But for anybody who's been fundraising for more than 10 or 20 or 30 years, we've seen these ups and downs, and they are temporary, and the market does come back. Also, you know, not everybody is in trouble financially now. People who are in medical supplies and invested in Purell and Clorox, they're doing extremely well. From what I understand, anybody who's selling pizza is making a killing right now. I know it sounds silly and jokey, but it's not. Anybody who's running a grocery store is making a fortune right now. And so there are industries and sectors that people are doing very well, and other people are stable. And I just want to reiterate that most people are not making their annual gifts to your organizations out of stock. They're just not. And so they have probably, unless they've lost their job, the same cash flow as they had 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And they want to do something meaningful, and they want meaning and purpose in their life. And it's your job, it's always been your job, to connect people with causes that are important and meaningful to them. This crisis has not diminished the need for your services, and it has not eliminated the value and worth that you bring to the table. The people that care about arts and care about culture or care about healthcare or care about the environment or education or literacy or homelessness, none of that's changed. Maybe they're going to change the direction. Some people are going to give more to homelessness and healthcare and food crisis right now. But I'll tell you, I was just talking this morning to an organization, an animal shelter, and they, you may not automatically think that an animal shelter has emergency needs, but the number of people who are going to be unemployed and lose their jobs, there's going to be, and are sick and in the hospital, there's going to be more pet surrender this month and next month than for years. And so those organizations that may not be top of mind as in this crisis are going to have the need for their services and programs is going to be exponential. And so, I really do encourage you to think about, what's your emergency need? What's your emergency fund? No matter what kind of organization, there are still donors that love you and care about you and want you to be here now and far into the future. So keep up the asking. So,
Hey, Amy, I do have a question as well. So,
yeah.
This is Maggie.
Yes.
And so, not to throw a difficult one at you, but I did remember seeing recently that one of the universities got a little bit of a backlash because they sent out an email about planned gifts and like, remember us in your will. And a lot of people thought that that was like a distasteful thing, as people are actually, dying from this crisis, dying from this disease. And so is there some things that maybe organizations should be careful about when they're making their asks to not be insensitive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really critical that you, in any communication that you're having with donors, that you acknowledge that these are really challenging times and that this is not business as usual. I actually was working with a client. It's a Ronald McDonald House chapter or house. And they sort of right at the beginning of this crisis, they were getting ready to mail a spring appeal, and it didn't mention anything of the sort. And I actually made them get it back from the mail house. I said, you can't send something that doesn't acknowledge this. Thank goodness it hadn't already gone out in the mail. It was still at the printer, and I made them like halt the presses. And so I think that there is a time and place for everything, and probably a legacy campaign or a planned giving campaign may be seen as insensitive right now. It's interesting. I think a lot of people are thinking about what's important and meaningful in their lives right now. This is an opportunity to have those conversations, but you have to know your audience and you have to do it with tact and care. And so maybe a mailing isn't an appropriate venue for a legacy or planned giving mailing. I would hold it a month or two, honestly. But I think that it is something that people are thinking about, is how do they live their lives? What's important to them? What kind of legacy do they want to leave? How are they going to step up and help in this crisis? It is interesting to see. There was an article in the Times, I guess yesterday, about this doctor from New Hampshire who is going to New York to volunteer because he can help with this specific type of patient. And nobody will let them stay in their building, in their apartment. Like he has siblings in the city, but the building won't let him in. And so even though his family was expecting him to stay with them because he's working in the hospitals in New York now. They don't want to bring COVID into the building. So people are, even though he's doing this sort of heroic thing, he's traveled from New Hampshire to New York to save people's lives. People are saying, not in my building. And so it is interesting. I think people are, some people are rising to the occasion and doing amazing, heroic things, and other people are acting as people do. And so I think a lot of people are thinking about the legacy that they want to leave, but you have to be careful and know who your audience is. Maybe a mass mailing probably isn't the best idea at this moment. Okay, so I see Tracy saying, I run the animal response team for animal emergencies and set up emergency animal shelters. Thanks for mentioning the animals and the people that care for them. Yep, happy to do it. Okay, so Tim says, while annual gifts may not be directly impacted by the stock market, it is a different consideration when considering planned giving right now. Yeah, so another reason, thank you, Tim, for not maybe mailing a planned giving thing right now is that those gifts, planned gifts, are often made out of assets and stock. And so people may be thinking that's like a crazy thing to ask for when the stock market's down. So one other thought that just came to mind as you're thinking about asking for gifts, especially if you're in a capital campaign, is that you may want to think about extending people's pledge period or giving or sort of letting people know, listen, if now is not an okay time to make a gift, we will be here when you're ready. Right? So giving people the reassurance that when they can't make a gift, if they can't make a gift now, that you love them just the same, that you'll be here in the community, and that you hope that they'll think of you again when they get back on their feet. So I think just being thoughtful, considerate, mindful is really, really important. All right, I just wanted to share some other resources that I'm providing for the community. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, or if you think of a question at a later date, I'm having sort of town hall style conversations for as long as the crisis lasts. I'm doing them twice a week, Mondays at 2 through the Capital Campaign Toolkit. And they're mostly campaign focused questions that we're answering. And on Thursdays at 3 o'clock, sort of general fundraising conversations. It's mostly Q&A. This week I had more than 300 people on each of those calls, but if you want to sign up for them and join the conversation, it's just to build a community of fundraisers across the country. And actually I had people from all over the world join. So it was really inspiring and motivating and thoughtful. So Maggie, what else? Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I just want to issue once again a sincere thank you. We're very grateful to have you give your time today to answer questions, engage everybody with their dialogue. We also am very grateful to all the participants on today's call, for your candidness and, replying through the chat, and it's a different atmosphere than we're used to, right? With our typical trainings. And so, of course, we look forward to the day, whether, it's later this year or who knows when, but, there will come a day that, hopefully we can get together and we can, have more of the in-person dialogue. But I appreciate all your time today, to Amy and to all the participants. So thank you to all.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Everyone, there is a survey when you close out, so please take the time to let us know what you thought of today's training. We always love feedback, so how we can help serve you better. And Amy, we look forward to hopefully seeing you soon.
Yep. All right. Hopefully.
Yep. Stay well.
See you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.